We've been talking about adding and subtracting integers. Today we're going to do 6.4 multiplying integers. We have talked about a lot of rules for adding and subtracting integers. Let's go ahead and sing the song of the rules for that. Here we go. Same sign.
Add and keep different signs, subtract. Take the sign of a larger number, then you'll be exact.
Okay, so we know whenever you have the same sign, you're adding the numbers, keeping the sign. Whenever you have different ones, you're doing what? Subtracting them and taking the sign of the larger number. You're basically going to forget those rules when you're multiplying. Whenever you multiply up here, what you've got to do is look to see how many negative numbers or how many negative signs you have. So if you have an even amount of negative signs, your answer every single time will be positive. So you can see right here, I've got -2 and -5. How many negative numbers are those?
2.
There's 2 of them. Is 2 even or odd? It's even. So because there's an even number of negative signs, your answer is going to be what? Positive. Okay? So now let's look at this. If you have an odd number or an odd amount of negative signs, your answer will be negative. So right here you can see -2, -3, -5. How many negative numbers were there?
3.
There were 3 negative numbers. Is 3 odd or even? It's an odd number. Therefore, your answer is going to be negative. Okay? So let's come over here and let's look at this. Here's another example. It says if you have a negative and a positive. So let's talk about this. How many negative numbers do you see here?
2.
How many negative numbers? There's only 1. Is 1 odd or even?
Odd.
It's odd. So because it's an odd number of negative signs, your answer has to be,
Negative.
it must be negative. And as you can see here, the answer is -8. All right, so we're going to do a few examples.
Okay.
Step number 1 here is asking us to find the product. There's something that I'm having you write down right there in red. If you did not write it down in red, go ahead and put it in there for me now because it's important. What does it tell you to do there?
Find your sign first.
Find your sign first. So you're going to try to figure out whether the answer should be positive or negative before you ever move on to try to find what the answer might be. Problem A says -5 times -7. Because remember, whenever you have these parentheses right here, that means to multiply. All right? How many negative numbers do I have there? There's 2 negative numbers. Is 2 even or odd? That's an even number. If I have an even number of negative signs, my answer will always be? It will always be a positive. Now, you're simply going to multiply like normal. What is 5 times 7? 35. So your answer is going to be positive 35. Problem B says -8 times 2. How many negatives are there?
1.
1. Is 1 odd or even? Odd. Every time you have an odd number of negatives, your answer will always be negative. What is 8 times 2?
16.
So your answer would be, because remember, you want to find your sign first. Looking at this first one right here, how many negative numbers do I have? 1. If there's only 1, will my answer be negative or positive?
Negative.
It'll be negative. Now what's 12 times 0? 0. As I walked around, some of you put -12. Okay. Now, is this the correct answer?
No.
Why not?
Because 0 can't be a negative nor positive.
0 is not positive or negative, so your answer is just plain old 0. Remember, for those of you who put down that your answer was -12, please remember that anytime you multiply by a 0, your answer will always equal 0. Let's go to the next one. How many negative numbers do I have on problem D? 1. Will my answer be negative or positive? Negative. And what's 4 times 6? 24. So your final answer is -24. Just remember, as this says up here, always find your sign first when you're multiplying or dividing, and that will help you. Then you can just simply do the multiplication or the division and find your answer that way. This one tells us to evaluate the expression. What's that word evaluate mean? Solve the expression. Okay, do you guys remember beginning of the year? Plug it in, plug it in.
Plug it in, plug it in.
All right, so all we're going to do is we are going to plug in the numbers for where we have letters. Instead of a squared, what will it say?
-3 squared.
Negative 3 squared. Now, because the negative 3 is the number I'm squaring, I'm going to go ahead and just put parentheses around it. So then negative 3 squared. You have negative 3 squared. Someone raise your hand and tell me, what does that mean? I don't want the answer. I want to know what it means. Katie.
I mean, you have to multiply negative 3 times itself.
Okay, so I'm going to do negative 3 times what?
Negative 3.
Times negative 3. So just make sure that the negative 3 is getting multiplied 2 times. On a test or a quiz, I want to see this work right here, so it shows me that you understand what you're doing. How many negatives do I have there? 2. Is that even or odd?
Even.
Every time that you have an even number, your answer becomes a positive. And then what's 3 times 3? So what's my answer? Positive 9 is correct. Problem B says, evaluate x, y, z when x equals 2, y equals negative 4, and z equals 6. Can someone tell me, what does it mean when you have a bunch of letters right there next to each other? You have to multiply them, okay? So we're going to go ahead and multiply. What is x equal?
2.
2. What about y?
Negative 4.
Negative 4. What about z?
6.
Okay, so should I just put these numbers right there next to each other? Put parentheses in there. When I have parentheses, what does that tell me?
You multiply.
You're multiplying. Okay, you could put parentheses around the 2 if you wanted. You don't have to. It's totally up to you, okay? So let's just go ahead and work from left to right. Let's look at this first one right here. Between the 2 and the negative 4, how many negatives do I have?
1.
I only have 1. So does it stay negative or turn positive?
Negative.
It stays negative because it's an odd number. What is 2 times 4? 8. Therefore, we already know it's going to be a negative, so that's negative 8. I still have to bring this number down here, okay? So am I just going to plop it down a 6 right next to it? Bring your parentheses down too, okay? Now, once again, let's talk about how many negative numbers do I have?
1.
Only 1. So will my answer be negative or positive? It's going to be negative. Every time you have 1 negative, your answer will be negative, okay? What is 8 times 6? 48. So your final answer is? Negative 48. For this next one, it's going to be a review problem. Find the mean, median, mode, and range of the data. Okay, when you come to this kind of things, this will be on your midterm. Anytime you guys have like SATs or tests like that, this kind of information will be on there. So I want to keep reviewing it. But before you do anything, what should I do to this data set?
Order from least to greatest.
You always have to have that data set in order from least to greatest. What's the tiniest one?
17.
Next.
30.
Next.
38.
Next.
38.
And last.
42.
Okay, now I want you guys to go ahead and find these 4 things on your own. Please make sure you show work for everything except for the mode. As I walked around, I saw lots of people that had the correct answer. Let's talk about the mean. What does the mean mean? The average. So you have to add up all the numbers. When you added the numbers, what was your number?
165.
165. Remember, this is how you show work. Now, remember, a lot of you, I saw there were a few of you that boxed that in and were happy that you had added them up. But I did not ask you to just add the data set, okay? Instead, you now have to do what?
Divide by how many numbers there are.
Divide by how many numbers you have in your data set. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers in my data set. So you're dividing by the number 5. When you do that, what's my mean? 33. Okay, remember, I want to see this work right here whenever you're doing this kind of a problem. Median. What is the median?
The middle number.
The middle number. Out of that data set, it was 38. How about the mode? What's that mean?
Number that appears.
The number that appears the most, which was?
38.
Also 38. Now the range. How do I find the range?
Highest. The highest and the lowest number.
You take your biggest number and you subtract your smallest number, and what do you get? 25. How many of you guys got all of them right? Great job. This slide is talking all about the things that we've discussed before this. Adding and subtracting integers, okay? So once again, as I just walked around, there was probably only about 3 of you guys that had all 3 of them correct. So let's talk about the first one. Same sign, add and keep, different signs, subtract and take. What kind of a number is this?
Negative.
What's that? Is that the same sign or a different sign? Okay, same sign, add and keep, different sign, subtract. So we're subtracting these numbers. 5 minus 4 is 1. Take the sign of the larger number. -1. Raise your hand if you got -1. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is the idea that we talked about yesterday. Does anyone remember, by raising their hand, what it's called when you have two negative signs there? Emma? A double negative. Guys, whenever you have a double negative, that's two negative signs side by side with no number in between them. All that is a parenthesis in between it. Okay, there's no number in between them. What happens to those?
Make them positive.
Two negatives. Remember, you don't want two negative people around. Anytime you have two negatives, it will always become a positive, okay? So instead of writing 6 plus 1, we're going to rewrite that. This is a step that I want to see there so I understand. You mean 6 plus 1. Guys, what's 6 plus 1? 7. This was the problem that many people missed. Raise your hand if you got that correct. All right? You just got to remember that double negative. Here's the last and final one. I had a few people who missed this one too. Let's just look at it. Remember, every number has a sign, and that sign is directly in front of that number. What kind of a number is that? Negative. What's that?
Negative.
What's that?
Negative.
I have all three negative signs. So are those the same sign or a different sign?
Same.
Remember, same sign. Add the numbers and keep the sign. So 2 plus 1 is 3, plus 5 is 8, and keep the sign. So what's the answer?
Negative 8.
-8. Raise your hand if you were one of the people who had all three of them correct. All right.
Y'all changed it.
All right, so that's the little bit of review for today on finding the sum or the difference.